And this time I'm going to do a sound check. This time the device is hearing me, so my hope is that we will not have a missing recording from today like we did from last week. All right. Bump, bump. What are you doing? Bump there. Two weeks ago, we talked about nonverbals of appearance, and we said appearance is the fastest kind of communication because it moves at the speed of light. Last week, we talked about gestures and movements. We said that's the most expressive because it changes from moment to moment in the way that appearance doesn't usually. It's hard to change your clothes that fast, and if you're tall or short, mostly that never changes. Today, we are going to talk about nonverbal channels that make the biggest difference when you are talking to another person face-to-face in a real-time conversation. We have three topics we are going to take up. First, the entire nonverbal function of regulation. Regulation refers to when there are multiple people. Could be two, could be a group discussion, as in this picture. Whose turn is it to talk? Now, last week, we spent about a minute on the turn-taking model. I very quickly named the behaviors, didn't go into detail, and then said this entire model is being challenged by new research, which is true. We will get to that new research at the end of class. I didn't do it to be suspenseful. I just tried to organize it every other way, and this is the way it seemed to make sense. Second, we're going to talk about oculesics, a fancy academic name for nonverbal communication that you do with your eyes. And you might think eye contact, but there's more to it than eye contact. We tend to call it eye behavior, but not all of it is behavior. As you will see, some of it is not voluntary. So the best way to think of it is nonverbals that use the eyes. Finally, vocalics. When you have a face-to-face conversation with someone, you and they do a lot of subtle things with your voice, a lot of very precise things with your voice. So regulation, nonverbals of the eyes, nonverbals of the voice. Regulation. The regulation model has 4 turn behaviors and then 1 human superpower. The turn behaviors. There is turn requesting. When you are not the one speaking, but you've just thought of something you want to contribute, something popped into your head and you want to say it, what we typically do is we will non-verbally execute a turn requesting behavior. Now, in a class or in a meeting, it tends to look like that. You raise your hand. In a conversation, that's not what it looks like. In conversation, we tend to do a few of these things. We will sharpen our eye contact. If I'm talking with you and you're the one speaking, and suddenly I want to say something, while you're talking, I may be looking around, I may be thinking, I may look relaxed as you speak, but as something occurs to me I want to say, my eyes may focus on you a little more. They may get wider. I may look at you more intently. We do it with eye contact in part. We also will inhale as though beginning to speak. We also may just open our mouth a bit to be ready to speak. And you trust that the person you're talking with will notice that, and because they are polite, they'll give you a turn to speak. Turn requesting behaviors in conversation are a lot more subtle. I should mention, they are sometimes so subtle that some people have a hard time noticing that you want to speak. You may have someone you know who is long-winded, who tends to talk and talk and talk and doesn't give other people a conversational turn. They might just not be noticing that you want a turn. Second category of regulative behavior is turn maintaining. Turn maintaining is what you do when someone tries to interrupt you, but you're not finished. What we tend to do, what Westerners tend to do at any rate, if you're speaking and someone tries to interrupt, you may increase your volume. So if I'm talking like this and someone tries to break in, I may go a little bit just to keep my volume up, make it clear I'm not going to let them break in. You might speed up. People sometimes talk a little faster when they don't want to be interrupted, because if you want to take a turn a verbal way, you can get a turn in the conversation is wait for them to pause and just begin talking. So if you're talking and you don't want to be interrupted, you might just not leave any pauses. And it makes it harder for them to take a turn without there being some social awkwardness. It's common with Westerners, when turn maintaining, to put their hand up. The hand up just means, not yet. Don't interrupt me yet. I'm not finished yet. And one common turn maintaining behavior is, while you continue to talk, look right at the person who's trying to take their turn, who's trying to interrupt. After turn requesting and turn maintaining, the opposite of turn maintaining is turn yielding. Turn yielding is what you do non-verbally when you want them to take a turn. So I might say, at the start of class this morning, I was assigning partners for the people watching assignment and the other assignment, which is, and someone might say, the article report. When I did this, that's a turn yielding behavior. It's signaling to you, I want you to take a turn. In a classroom or a meeting, turn yielding just looks like calling on someone. In a conversation, when someone signals they want a turn, if you turn to them, if you look at them and stop talking, that's turn yielding. That one's not that complicated typically. The fourth and final behavior that makes up the regulative turn-taking model is turn denying. Turn denying. This one has a slightly confusing name. The students I've taught nonverbal over the years often confuse this with turn maintaining. They think it means you want to deny someone else a turn. That's not what it means. Sometimes someone else wants you to take a turn or offers you a turn and you didn't want one. The best example of this, I don't know how common this is in Japanese universities, but there are some professors in American universities who will quiz students in the middle of class, one by calling on them without warning. I don't think that's very nice. I don't do that. But it is a practice. And so students, they will try non-verbally to come up with the right cue to send so the professor doesn't call on them. And that's turn denying. I don't want you to call on me. And I've asked students before, what is it that you do so professors won't call on you? And some of them say, just never make eye contact with them. Never look at them, and especially look like you're really taking notes. Look like you're thinking hard and taking notes. And I have to tell you, I can see the students who are doing that because they're afraid they're going to get called on. They look really obvious. And other students tell me, oh no, you look right at the professor the whole time. You just look at them like they're really, really interesting. Like you just want them to keep talking. And that kind of works. But that also, if you're doing it because you're desperate, you don't want to get called on, it also looks really obvious. The advice I give my students, if you don't want a professor who calls on people to call on you, find out, since most professors are old, what kind of eye problem do they have, and sit where they can't see you easily. So, for example, I'm farsighted. I can see the students in back crystal clear. You're very hard to see. So if I were the kind of professor who called on people, you'd be safe, you would be in danger. All of that to say, turn denying behavior, probably the least common of the four. If you've ever been having a conversation and the speaker said to you, oh, did you want to say something? And you said, no. They just looked at you and it looked like you were about to talk, but you let them know, no, I wasn't. That's turn denying. You may also have situations where you want to listen to them because they really need someone to listen. They're a good friend. They're emotionally upset. You just want to support them. So you're letting them do the talking. And that method that students sometimes have, look right at them and be fascinated. Look right at them as though what they're saying is really interesting. That is a good turn denying behavior. If you want them to talk, look interested in what they say. So those four behaviors, requesting, maintaining, yielding, and denying, that's the regulative model. There's one last behavior. I said we would talk about a human superpower, and that human superpower is the switch pause. The switch pause is the quick little silence when the turn changes from one speaker to another speaker. If you listen to people who are very familiar with each other, good friends, family members, having a conversation, sometimes they'll overlap a little bit. So the speaker who's about to begin will interrupt the speaker who's just finishing by a tiny bit, but not that often. There's a fairly major research agenda on this at the Max Planck Institute in Germany because the pause, when turns switch, is almost impossibly fast. Data that's been collected on conversation behavior from around the world says that the pause from one speaker stopping and the next speaker speaking is about 1/5 of 1 second on average, 200 milliseconds. Now, to let you know what that length of time means, when elite athletes who run the 100-meter sprint, when they hear the gun to start the race, it's 200 seconds until they begin to move. If we were experimentally right now, if I were to show you common objects on the screen and have you retrieve the word from memory and say it out loud, if I put up a picture of a pencil and you had to remember the word pencil and then say it out loud, that would take you over half a second, 3 times as long as common switch pauses. So it's almost weird how quickly we switch from speaker to speaker. It's quicker than we do just about anything else mentally. Babies up to about 6 months old, they will make noises in interacting with adults that are about the same as switch pauses. The second the adult is no longer talking, the baby will make some noise. But when babies get to about 9 months, which is about the age they figure out, those grown-ups Those are human beings, and they have their own brains. They're not extensions of me. Something funny happens. Their switch pauses get a lot longer. And then all the way up until they're fairly old, when they're even 8 years old on average, their switch pauses are still unusually long compared to adults. By about 9 or 10 years of age, they've shortened it, and they can do the fast switch pauses that other people can do. 2 more things to say about that. Actually, 3. One of them is the work they did at the Max Planck Institute. They collected data from conversational partners from all over the world, and the average was about 1/5 of 1 second, 200 milliseconds. Do you know who had the fastest switch pauses? Is there a reason that I would want to tell you in particular? Who do you think? The Japanese. The Japanese switch pause was 7 milliseconds. You have some fast switch pauses. The interesting thing about that, it is beyond dispute. It is simply true that we switch that quickly because while you're listening to the speaker, you are preparing what you're going to say. And when they stop, you're ready. Now, I teach listening probably more than I teach anything else. Earlier this week, I did a research presentation for Tokyo Gaidai, and it was on listening. And my most recent academic publication is in listening. You will hear a lot that if you want to be a good listener, you can't be thinking about what you're going to say next while they're speaking. You have to pay full attention. And let me tell you right now, that's bad advice. It oversimplifies. Now, if you're thinking so hard about what you're going to say that you don't notice what they say, then yes, that's bad listening. But what all of us do, while we are paying attention to what another person says, at the same time, we are preparing what our response will be. It involves paying close attention to what they say. If I have a bite of food in front of me, I pay attention to it while I decide, do I need a spoon or a fork or chopsticks? Is it hot or cold? Preparing what I'm going to do with it involves paying attention. So does listening to what the speaker says, preparing what your response will be. The final thing to say, this will seem obvious after I say it, but I want it in your notes so you don't oversimplify the whole phenomenon of switch pauses. We can switch quickly, almost ridiculously quickly. We don't always. Sometimes we slow down our response because a quick response could be upsetting or embarrassing. If a good friend of yours asks you out on a date, and you want them for a friend, not for a date, and you do a 7 millisecond switch pause and they say, hey, want to go out on Friday? No. That's probably going to hurt their feelings. So what you do, you slow down your response a little bit. And I could give other examples. If they ask you if you like this work of art they just did, and honestly, it's pretty ugly, and you need to be gentle and tactful, you might slow down your switch pause. So it's not the case that we always do it, but it is the case that we can do it. And by the way, this is another time I had a visual and completely forgot about it. I chose that as my visual for switch pauses because both their mouths are open. It looks like there might have been a little overlap there. That gets us through the turn-taking model of regulatives. We are now going to get to the second topic of the day. We're going to deal with oculesics beginning with eye contact. There are 3 things that are generally true about direct eye contact from another human being. The first thing is, direct eye contact from another person will attract our attention almost by reflex. It's very difficult to ignore someone making direct eye contact with you. I mentioned the human superpower of switch pauses a minute ago, but I've told my students for a long time, I have my own superpower involving eye contact and the involuntary drawing of attention. Back in the United States, it's a long story, but I gave away my car 10 years ago. I used to have a car, now I don't. So I walk everywhere. And in the United States, we have a real problem with people who are distracted while they drive. And they will flick through their phone while driving their car. So anytime I come to a crossing, a street crossing, or even a driveway, and I see that a car is coming my way, I just look at the side of the windshield where the driver should be. Look right at it. And they see me. And if I didn't do that, if I didn't make eye contact, they wouldn't. And I probably would have been run over about 20 times. I've been out with students before and said, watch this. And I make direct eye contact with the driver's side of the windshield and the car slows down. It's like Superman and his super breath. My eye contact can slow vehicles. Because if I don't look at them, they won't see that I'm there. But I look right at them where their eyes should be, their eyes lock on mine, and all of a sudden there I am. So that's the first thing we can say about eye contact. The second thing we can say, it tends to produce physical arousal. Physical arousal. Which could be positive, it could be negative. If someone you like a lot or find attractive makes eye contact with you, that's likely to be a more intense experience and a positive experience than if you just see them, but they're not looking at you. The negative arousal from eye contact, first of all, is the biggest reason so many people find public speaking scary. It's always about, and I've taught public speaking for decades, it's always about all the eyes in the room on you. You have a reflex built into you that if lots of people are looking at you, it feels unsafe. We have a history, many, many years old, of being the prey of pack animals, and also of living among a species, human beings, who sometimes are given to mob violence. So being the one who is singled out and is being given eye contact from a lot of people, it's a little bit like when you're up in a high place and you look down and it feels scary. You have a reflex that protects you from high places because they're dangerous. And you have a reflex that makes you respond to lots of eye contact because it could very plausibly be dangerous. The other thing we can say about negative arousal and eye contact. For the past 2+ years, with the pandemic, whether it was in college or in high school, I'm betting you were on a lot of Zoom meetings. And I am betting after you have a lot of Zoom meetings in a day, you feel very, very tired, very heavy in the brain. About 1.5 years ago, a team of researchers at Stanford put together a lot of work that had already been done to explain why is Zoom so exhausting. They said there are a lot of reasons, but reason number one was the weird eye contact. Right now, in this room, you can look down at your notes, you can look around. If this were a seminar and we were sitting in a circle, you could look at different people. You have options. When you're on a Zoom meeting, there is pressure. Look right at the camera. And what do you see on your device? You see a big close-up of a face making eye contact directly with you. And eye contact, direct eye contact, produces negative arousal. So when that happens, unbroken for the length of a meeting, it's not surprising that it makes us mentally tired. So we said eye contact draws attention. We said that it produces arousal. Could be positive, often it's negative. It's almost never neutral. The final thing we could say is that eye contact produces involvement. If you don't make eye contact with someone, you can ignore them. You can proceed as though they are not there. But if you make direct eye contact, then you are involved. And there are some applications of that later on. For now, we can just mention the point. All right. So what that brings us to are some variations on eye contact and what they are associated with. These came out of a couple of researchers. You don't need the names, but here they are if you're interested, and they'll be on the recording. Mario von Kronach and Johann Elgring, also from the Max Planck Institute in Germany. The first of the variations is mutual gaze. Mutual gaze. And what this refers to is two people looking at one another at the same time. We mentioned already in the model of turn-taking that when you turn yield in conversation, probably your partner requested a turn by looking right at you. And if you look right at them and you stop talking, you're yielding the turn, and that could be a moment of mutual gaze. It's also very common with people in romantic relationships, people in close family relationships. It's often an expression of affection, but it can also be an angry confrontation. Two people looking intensely into one another's eyes, not in a friendly fashion. That's variation number one. Variation number two, eye contact. Eye contact is what's happening right now. A lot of you are looking at me. I am looking back at you, but I only have two eyes, and there are 15 people in here. So I'm looking at you one by one as I look around the room. It's like distributed mutual gaze. We're interacting, the interaction is direct, but it's one to many. From those two, mutual gaze and eye contact, which largely have the same function, direct interaction, we then come to one-sided look. One-sided look refers to one person looking at the other, but the eye contact is not returned. One-sided look has two variations, two categories, two examples. There is, first of all, gaze avoiding. Gaze avoiding. When someone is speaking to you and you deliberately do not make eye contact with them. I mentioned before that when you are turn maintaining, you might look right at them. But another thing people sometimes do to turn maintain is avoid eye contact. Maybe I'm lecturing away, and I've had students before who are very enthusiastic, raise their hand all the time, and just this once I want to finish my thought, so I'll talk to that side of the room while a hand is up over here. I know the hand is up, but I'm going to finish my thought and then call on someone. That might be turn maintaining. The other thing that gaze avoidance is, I don't know if you remember last week when we talked about posture. We said leaning forward shows nonverbal immediacy or psychological closeness, and leaning backward shows nonverbal non-immediacy or psychological distance. I say all of that to say, gaze avoiding is another example of a non-immediacy behavior. We show psychological closeness with direct eye contact. We show psychological distance by deliberately not making eye contact. The other variation alongside gaze avoiding is gaze omitting. Gaze omitting. The difference between avoiding and omitting is very simple. Avoiding is deliberate. You did it on purpose. Gaze omitting, you did not choose to do it. This is from the debut of a movie, Suicide Squad. That's Dean Cavill and Jason Momoa. Dean Cavill does not know Jason Momoa is behind him. Dean Cavill is therefore gaze omitting. He doesn't know there's anybody there. It is a one-sided look because Jason Momoa is looking. If you are studying and you're deeply into it and you're concentrating and your friend comes and sits down and looks at you and you saw that someone arrived but you thought maybe it was a stranger because you're concentrating, that's gaze omission. Not deliberate, not a negative message. I should mention here, the other person in the interaction does not know necessarily that it's omission. They might interpret it as avoiding. So if you wonder why someone's not interacting with you, it's possible they're just distracted. The difference between distracted lack of eye contact or deep concentration lack of eye contact and unfriendly lack of eye contact can be subtle. And people who are practicing gaze avoiding might pretend that it was not deliberate, that it's just omitting. Two more variations on eye contact. One of them is one of my favorites, civil inattention. Civil inattention. Civil inattention's a real simple move. A person walks up to you, you make eye contact with them for a moment, both of you see that you don't need to interact, so you break eye contact and you don't look at each other again. When do you do this? Well, one place you do it is on a crowded train. Someone steps into your field of view, they're a stranger, you look right at them, both of you break eye contact and you're done. You also commonly do it on an elevator. The door opens, someone steps in, you adjust a little to give them room, and then you don't interact with them. The example my students in the United States, especially my male students, use is males in the bathroom with a row of urinals. Someone arrives, you register that they're there, and then you very deliberately do not look at them because it's not polite to look at someone in the bathroom. They're there, but because you're polite, you won't make eye contact and you won't interact. Here I should mention, when it comes to civil inattention, there is a theory that it makes sense to introduce here, and I again did not put it on the slide, which was sloppy of me. Equilibrium theory. Equilibrium theory was the work of Michael Argyle and Janet Dean at Oxford University. And what they said was, we tend to keep, when we're in the same place as other people, and especially when we are interacting with other people, we will use space and eye contact in balance with one another. So, if you're trying to talk to someone who's maybe 15, 20 feet away, your roommate or your good friend was about to leave, and at the last minute you realized there's something you needed to say, so they turned around and you're almost yelling it. They will lock eye contact with you because you're so far away. But if the two of you are in a crowded elevator and you're 18 or 20 centimeters from each other, then you're not likely to make eye contact that close because it's too much. You break eye contact when you're very close. But when you're very far apart, you lock eye contact, and the two balance each other. What does that have to do with civil inattention? Commonly, we practice civil inattention in places where we are crowded. On the train, in the elevator. You break eye contact because that's polite, because there are too many people and they're too close. There is also, I actually should have put this a little further up, staring. Although, no, it does make sense here. Staring, the only thing we mean by staring is unbroken, direct eye contact. Staring can be a few things. Small children stare. They'll look directly at people and keep looking directly at people because they don't know that that causes negative arousal. Until they learn manners, they just do that, especially if they think someone is unusual looking or interesting looking. Staring can also be a way that we express anger or hostility. And it can be a way to try to exercise power or dominance. I think I used this example back at an earlier class meeting. But when I teach classes in the United States, and it's first-year college students, and they're fresh out of high school, and American high school students will do a lot of talking to each other in class while the teacher is trying to teach. And when they do that in my college class, and let's say two friends are sitting right there whispering to each other, I will often, while talking, walk over here and just do this until they stop. And the reason that's moderately effective, they know why I'm doing it. Other people taking notes, doing their thing, they just heard me pause. They don't necessarily know what happened. But if I stare at them for a minute, I'm telling them, stop that. The interesting thing is, you can either give in to the exertion of power or dominance, or you can stare back. And there might then be a contest of wills. Who's going to look away first? We have a day coming up in the class where we will talk about nonverbals of power and dominance, and we will return to eye contact on that day. All right, the final of the variations. This is the one that is not voluntary. It's the reason I don't think we should call it eye behavior. Because dilation of the pupil, you cannot make your pupils dilate voluntarily. And yet, pupil dilation does communicate. It communicates two different ways, both of them fairly subtle. One of them is our pupils dilate when we look at something that we like. It's been experimentally demonstrated endless times. If you look at someone and you find them attractive, your pupils will dilate. Our pupils dilate if we see someone or something and we find it cute. People, and women more than men, their pupils will dilate if they see a baby. Men do it too, women do it more. Your pupils may dilate if you see a puppy, and you happen to like puppies. And it's not just liking, because if you see your favorite kind of car in your favorite color, you won't necessarily get dilated pupils from that. There's a relational aspect to it. An attractive person, a cute baby, will do it. The other way pupil dilation communicates, we find faces more attractive if the eyes are dilated. The medication that eye doctors, optometrists use to dilate your eyes to examine them, that medication was first isolated and used in the 1600s in Italy as a cosmetic. Women would dilate their eyes with atropine, which they got from a flower. They named the flower belladonna, Italian for pretty woman, because dilated eyes were attractive. Now, that's not just an old culturally determined thing. An exercise I used to assign in this class when there were more paper magazines in the world was sit down with an edition of Vogue or any other fashion magazine and just go through and try to find me a model in there whose eyes are not dilated. They did it with Photoshop, or they did it by touching up the photo, but all the models had dilated eyes, because we respond to faces with dilated eyes by finding them more attractive. We could demonstrate it experimentally. If I showed you faces and I didn't tell you what I was testing for pretty consistently, if the faces were pretty close together in things like symmetry and averageness, the things we talked about 2-3 weeks ago, dilated eyes would be a reliable tiebreaker. In fact, I probably should have mentioned them the day we talked about attractiveness, but you're getting it now. That gets us to the end of eye behavior, and it brings us to where we will talk about voice behavior. Now, I should warn you, at this point, from now until the end of class, I have virtually no pictures. Because think about it, we're about to talk about voice. I couldn't find any pictures of voices. There are a few topics, a few findings that come up very consistently in the ways we use voice to adjust our communication. I put this one first because it's the easiest one to explain. Parentese. Parentese. The way parents talk to babies. Now, I don't mean baby talk. I don't mean, is you a cute little wubby-dubby? I don't mean that. But when parents talk to babies, often they'll talk like this. Their voice goes up and down. And they'll stretch out. They'll stretch out the vowels. 2 things research has shown about that. One of them is, people do it in every part of the world, and they do it instinctively without being taught. Everywhere we've found people, we obviously have found babies, and parentese shows up. Babies draw it out of us. We talk that way to babies. Second, it helps the baby. There is right now a research project in the United States at the University of Washington. Parents of 14-month-olds are being recruited. The baby is 1 year and 2 months old. And the parents are coached in how to use parentese even more than they have been. All the different times they can use parentese. And the parents who complete that coaching, in the study they also have a control group that they don't coach with parentese. The babies whose parents get coached by 18 months old, 1.5 years, are saying twice as many full words as the babies whose parents are not coached. What we think happens, babies are still trying to figure out what is a social cue and what is not. What is an invitation to interact and what is not. Parentese is a very easy to spot social cue. It tells a baby, I want to interact with you. Babies don't always know when grown-ups are talking that they're talking to them and they should respond. But they can tell when it's, did you build that tower? It's so big. They can figure out that's interaction. And it lures them in and it holds their attention. The one other thing I'll mention about parentese, you take a moment and think about it, it's probably obvious. We also use it with dogs. And they respond. Probably for the same reason. Second thing we can say about the use, about what research tells us about voice and the difference it makes. Phonemes Phonemes are the smallest unit of spoken language. They are the sounds that make up spoken language. And the same team of researchers researching parentees has also, for a number of years, been researching how babies learn phonemes. Babies up to about 9 months of age can hear and will respond to a human voice making any sound in any language on earth. 12-month-old to 18-month-old babies no longer do that. They respond more quickly to the sounds in their own languages. And from other work, we know as you get older, your ability to even hear sounds that are in other languages but not yours goes away. If anyone has ever wondered, the R and the L in English, which is very confusing for native speakers of Japanese who don't have the two sounds. That's the clearest example I have when I teach about phoneme acquisition in the United States, because my students will ask, isn't that difference obvious? Why can't they hear it? And we do a demonstration about the plosive P, a P with a puff behind it, and the non-plosive P. Port, sport. Pot, spot. Pin, spin. And I ask them, can you hear the difference? And they can't. But to speakers of a lot of languages around the world, those are not the same letter. They don't sound even that similar. And I say, when you were about 12 months of age, your brain reclaimed the connections that could notice that difference. And now you can't hear it. You're too old. And that pattern that we lose, the plasticity, the ability to learn new phonemes as we get older, that's the reason that a very young child learning a new language will learn to speak it with no accent. I have a colleague in the United States who started learning English. She grew up in Germany. Started learning English when she was about 15. Speaks it fluently. Speaks it better than I do. But has a German accent and always will. And then my mother is 89 years old and trying to learn Spanish. And it's the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life. Buenos dias? No, buenos dias. Buenos dias, that's what I said. No. But she's got an 89-year-old brain and can't hear new phonemes. Third thing coming out of Vocalics research, we know that there are voice characteristics that convey certain elements of personality. These elements of personality, there are 3 of them. Attractiveness, maturity, and turn-taking. Attractiveness, maturity, and turn-taking. People who, when they speak, have a resonant voice. A resonant voice, when you say that someone has a resonant voice, you mean that it has a round, full sound, which may not help that much. The actor, the American actor who played Darth Vader in Star Wars, and also played Mufasa in The Lion King. Maybe you haven't seen those films. I probably should have come armed with examples of Japanese actors. But I have a reasonably resonant voice. The opposite of a resonant voice is a nasal voice. And I know people who have speaking voices that sound like this. And they don't try to talk like this. It's just what their voice sounds like. Because their voice is up in their nose. It's not resonating down in their chest. The point to be made there, some speaking voices are more attractive than other speaking voices. In the West, it also tends to be attractive to have a moderately low-pitched voice. Moderately low-pitched. Some people's voices are so low that it's hard to understand them, especially in a noisy room. That's not necessarily attractive. But being a little lower than average in pitch does tend to be evaluated as attractive. The other two qualities, pitch variety. Pitch variety. There are some people who talk like this, and everything they say comes out in the same pitch, especially in the United States. Stereotypically, this is what teenagers sound like, and they sound bored and not really very confident. And I have had wonderful, smart, hardworking students who are in their first or second year of college, and they're still talking like this, and they're going on job interviews. And I tell them, the one thing you've got to do, you have to have more variety in your pitch. You have to sound like you're enjoying yourself. And with a little bit of coaching, they do it. Finally, there is articulation. 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 Which is more, it's loosely a matter of your voice, but it's also the other parts of your mouth. There are some people when they talk like this, and they don't make the sounds in the words distinctly, and they don't make the sounds in the words distinctly. And people who make the sounds in the words sharply enough that they're easy for listeners to understand without having to strain, that's more attractive than people who don't articulate enough. Second element of personality is maturity. Some people, when they talk, sound a lot younger than they are. Some people have voices that sound almost babyish. The most distinguished communication major I ever had back in the United States, her senior project was voted an award by the city government. But if you listen to her talk, you would think she was about 3 years old. And she's answered the phone before and had salespeople say to her, "Is your mommy home?" So, something that can be conveyed is how old you are by the quality of your voice. Then finally, there's turn-taking. And we mentioned this quickly before. There are some people, they take very long turns in conversation. They don't notice other people's turn requesting cues, and they convey the personality impression that they're very self-centered and that they don't pay attention to other people. All right, fourth thing that comes out of research into what we do with our voice is positive impressions. Positive impressions. And actually, this is a failure in organization on my part, but this is going to speed things up. The two things that come out of research I actually just mentioned, but there's a third. So I mentioned having a resonant voice, and I mentioned varying your pitch. The third one, speaking relatively rapidly. Speaking relatively rapidly, pretty quickly. Someone who speaks slowly in the United States is likely to be evaluated as not very intelligent, not very fun, not very confident. But if they speak a little bit more quickly than average, they convey the impression that they know exactly what they're talking about, that they are energetic, and those are positive impressions. All right, finally, there is emotion. And there's a whole cluster of emotion, or whole cluster of research about whether we can judge emotion from hearing someone's voice. We mentioned very briefly last week when we talked about affect displays. You could see that someone's angry if they're clenching a fist. You can see that someone is emotionally distraught if they're sitting down, curled up in a ball. You can also tell people's emotional state often from their voice. You may have had the experience where you call your parents on the phone and you don't want them to know that you had a bad day. So you try to put on your most cheerful voice and one sentence into the phone call, they say, "What's wrong?" Because you can't fool them. They can hear it. Here's what the research tells us. Sadness and anger are easy to recognize. If you're sad, if you're angry, even if you try to control yourself, that is very likely to leak in your voice. And the interesting mistake a lot of people make. In a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about emotion on the face. If you're angry and don't want people to know it, or you're sad and don't want people to know it, you might compose your face and hide it, but then let it go because you don't think about it coming out in your voice. That's a common mistake. Joy and fear are moderately easy to recognize from the voice. Not as easy as sadness and anger. In experimental setups, people's scores are not as high for joy and fear. One emotion that's easily disguised and hard to tell just from the voice is disgust. Disgust is almost always expressed in the face, and you can have a disgusted voice. You can deliberately have a disgusted voice. But there are some wonderfully horrible experimental setups for inducing people to feel disgust, and then you give them an incentive to hide it, to describe their experience and not let the disgust show in their voice, and they can do it successfully. The final thing the research shows, there's an in-group advantage that people are more accurate with speakers from their own culture. But you're likely to make mistakes if you try to judge emotion from listening to a speaker from a different culture. So you might listen to people talking who are from Italy or from Greece, and you might think they were really angry at each other, that they're yelling at one another. No, that might just be the way they talk to their friends all the time. I might come here and I might talk to someone and think, wow, they were really pleasant. They were really sweet. And you might say, no, they think you're an idiot. Because I don't know how to judge that from listening to someone's voice. All right. Here's what I'm going to do. I said that at the end of class we were going to talk about the new model that challenges the turn-taking model. I'm going to put that off. We're going to do that 2 weeks from now. Next week there is no class because you're cleaning up from the festival. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to carve out about the first 10 minutes of class for the new model of interaction, grounding cycles. But right now, I'm going to repair the mess that got made at the beginning of class and finalize the assignments for the partner pairings for these assignments. Let's see, I need this. I need this. Let's see. I'm going to add you. Boom.